Can people be good without God? What if we can actually be better? You're listening to the Better Off Damned podcast.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
Better off without God, better off without religion. Faith, fear. We are the Better Off Damned.
Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in, so to speak. I'm Thomas Hansen.
I'm Jack Lawrence.
And I'm David Masters.
And this is podcast number 1 for us at Better Off Damned. Today we're mostly just going to talk about ourselves and our history with religion. David?
I was raised fundamentalist Pentecostal in a small town named Vidor, Texas. Was pretty sheltered as a child, for the most part. I was in public school for a while, then I left public school and went to a Pentecostal private school up until I was about 16 when I moved to New York. And then I went to public high school in New York and then realized that there was a world outside of southeast Piney Woods, Texas, and it was like, oh, holy crap, it's completely different.
So what was that world like in southeast Piney Woods, Texas?
Lots of racism, lots of fundamentalists, mainly Baptists and Pentecostals. Baptists and Pentecostals don't really get along too well. But, yeah, it was interesting. For a kid that didn't have a lot of, too many friends growing up, there's not really much I can tell you about the area, but the religion of, fundamentalist Pentecostal, I did it all, spoke in tongues. I was considering going into the ministry for a while. I've read the Bible cover to cover, which is one of the main reasons that I don't buy into it. Plus, one of my oldest, best friends in the world is a lesbian, and she came out when she was really young, and it was a very big conflicting feelings in me as I was growing up, trying to reconcile my religion versus my friendship, so.
Right, there's the hate the sin, not the sinner.
Which is bullshit. It's just as condescending.
Well, yeah, it's still hate.
Yeah, well, it's just condescending, it really is. It's like, I don't hate you, but I hate your entire, definition of what you do.
So those were some of the influences that started changing your mind about things?
Yeah, that was probably the initial influence, because it was before she came out of the closet, she was practicing in her religion was Wiccanism. She was a really young Wiccan, and she was self-study. Her parents were very open about it, and my grandmother, who pretty much raised me, she wasn't tolerant of any other religions besides Pentecostal Christianity.
Right, and you started dabbling in that at the time, didn't you?
After I moved to New York, and I was living in Hamilton at the time, and one of my other friends, Rebecca Coffey, she's, or was, I don't know if she still is, she was Wicca, and that's when I started looking into it, and, I'm also a magician. I've been doing magic as a hobby since I was 4, and then, I started doing it professionally when I was about 16. That's when I got my first paying gig.
So did it feel like there was a connection between those?
Yeah, a little bit, because, I did a lot of close-up magic, and I was starting to dabble into, different little mentalist effects, but nothing really deep. And that was about the same time whenever I was really exposed to, tarot card readings, palm readings, and fortune tellings. And I never read, the books on how to do that stuff. I just took the cards, and I'd actually use playing cards, because I was familiar with them. And I'd have people shuffle the decks, and I would, tell them shit about themselves. And you were there that one time with what was his name? Murray?
Eddie.
Eddie? Yeah, and he was about to go into the Marines, I think it was, some branch of the military.
Yeah, this is going back like 10 years.
Yeah, and this is when I thought I could actually do this stuff. I didn't know what cold reading was, things like that.
So you kind of taught yourself to cold read without understanding what that was.
Right, because you were there. I mean, I was, through cold reading, I was getting everything spot on, and, he ended up, like, crying by the end of it, and, like, he didn't have a good relationship with his dad at the time. And he ended up later on going and like talking to his dad and reconciling shit. And all that did was reaffirm my initial belief that is like, well, okay, there is something to it. So yeah, I mean, I believe I could actually do this stuff. And in fact, one night, you remember Mike, we drove around like right after that the whole night. And we ended up getting like $300 in scratch-offs because we went to different stores. And I'd be like, I feel that one. And it'd win. And then go to a different store. I feel that one. It'd win. And boom, 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 boom. We ended up taking home like $300, and that just further reaffirmed.
So it was a mixture of like dumb luck, intuition, and cold reading without being aware of how that worked.
Right, and I almost slightly regret learning about cold reading because now that I've learned what it is, I don't feel I have as strong of a grasp on it.
Right, because you're too aware of what you're doing.
Yeah, it's like I'm actually paying attention to what I do, which is something I don't need to do when I'm trying to do that in my magic shows. I just need to just do it again instead of like thinking about it. Because when I think about it, then it's just off. It doesn't work right. But when I don't think, or when I didn't think about it, and it was just going through it naturally, quote unquote.
Right. But that opened your eyes to a lot of fraud that's going on.
Definitely, that's when I started.
In religion.
Once I really started learning more about mentalism and reading some older mentalism books and learning about cold reading, I realized that's all I was doing, and that's all any fortune teller is doing, period. It doesn't matter what kind of fortune teller they are, it doesn't matter what kind of medium they are. All they're doing is cold reading.
Either consciously or subconsciously.
Right, and I think most of them that you see, like on the little houses in the neighborhoods or on the main roads,
they come from like fortune-telling families.
Yeah, gypsies. A lot of them in America are gypsies. I've been around a lot of gypsies. It's fun. They're really fun people. They're very
I've met a lot of them on the road. Like you start going, like I used to travel to Canada a lot and Nova Scotia. Like you'll find a lot of them off the, just off the beaten path.
Traveling family things, and they do like street performances and fortune telling and all that kind of stuff. And that's how their family is. But they're very, very close knit. Most of them. They're very, very suspicious of outsiders. I mean, you have to have some form of like talent or something usually to get in with them.
Right, because for one thing, a lot of them are con artists. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of what they do.
Yep.
Now, it doesn't matter how much some of the ones that dabble in these kind of supernatural things, think that they can do what they do. They use it for fraud.
Yeah.
And they use it for fraud knowingly, whether they think they can really do it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just part of that traveler lifestyle.
And when I really like learned into that, I looked back at like the church, because I already left the church at this point. I was like, I'm done. I read the Bible one too many times, and I was like, this is fucked up shit.
So it was the Bible that like kind of broke the belief.
The Bible combined with having lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual friends.
Right, but that was more so your transition away from organized religion.
Yeah,
that wasn't like the loss of your beliefs yet.
No, yeah, and the Bible, even the Bible wasn't the loss of my beliefs. I still thought there was some higher power, but I didn't care. I didn't think it cared where you put your penis.
Sure.
So, I mean, there was that whole thing. There was a lot of that, and then, you start realizing, like, the gypsies thing and the con artists, they're actually out there scamming people. The faith healers from the Pentecostal faith, no different. And they know they're doing it.
Oh, I think the vast majority of them do.
Yeah, they know they're doing it. I mean, there's a few that don't know what they're doing, but you won't see them do the leg growing trick. You won't see them do the normal parlor tricks. They just sit there and pray for people. There's a big difference between those guys and these other guys. Most of the ones that you see that just pray for people, it's just like, hey, you've had it happen to you, I'm sure, here. People's like, hey, can I pray for you randomly in like a parking lot? And it's like, excuse me?
I mean, but, I've met a lot of, like, religious people, including religious leaders, that really abhor, the sects and denominations that do those kind of things. Because I grew up Catholic. Let's get into my background a little bit. I don't know. When you lived in New York, did you know many Catholics? There's a lot of them there.
My mom married into a Catholic family.
All right. Well, there you go. Did you get the sense that when I grew up as a Catholic, you get the sense no one buys into it? It's just like this baggage.
No, it wasn't one of those Italian Catholic families that buy into it.
Oh, that's a different breed.
Yeah.
That is a different breed.
It was like they go to mass, like 2-3 times a week, or used to. I doubt they do anymore. My step-grandpa, he was Catholic, and him and I used to do Bible study together, and that was like one of the times I read through the Bible one too many times was actually with his Bible studies, because it was Pentecostal versus Catholic, perspectives.
Okay.
And we actually reconciled a lot between the Catholic beliefs and the Pentecostal beliefs. And I was like, listen, you can't take these other books that are like people wrote that are like deciphering the Bible. You can only base Christian beliefs on the Bible. If you start adding other stuff, you're putting faith in man. You're not putting faith in God. And that was something that he never really put together. And he was like late 80s, early 90s.
Well, it's a big difference between, how fundamentalists think and, the more, I guess, moderate Christians. Which I think in America, Catholics definitely fall into the moderate category.
I haven't met many fundamentalist Catholics.
Oh, they exist.
Yeah,
I don't know if they would use that word.
I would think they would be more so in like the motherhood and the priesthood.
From my experience, it's actually some of the priests and nuns that are the loosest about beliefs. Like, the parishioners believe more hardcore than the priests. And it might be the same thing. Maybe they, got too stigmatized by all the dogma. Maybe they read the Bible one too many times. But, I've met a lot of priests that are very, very lax about stuff. I don't know, the priests I knew, they were all smokers. A lot of them were heavy drinkers. I mean, these are some cliche things you hear about priests, but, honestly, like, you watch the news, and you hear these priests talk about God, like, half of them don't believe in hell now, and, the bishops, they're all hardcore about the shit. You always hear the bullshit coming from the bishops, but, really, I don't know where they stand with belief.
Well, maybe that's why more and more are coming out as atheists lately.
Well, I think more atheists have been coming out of the fundamental denominations than the priesthood.
No, I meant the more priests are starting to, when you see so-and-so priest come out as atheists, it's so far, a lot of them have been a lot of Catholic priests, and some of them kind of high up in America.
Right, I mean...
So, that makes sense, sure.
Anyway, when I was growing up, it's just people were so loose about belief in the area I lived. I guess you could say it's a secular part of the country. That makes enough sense. But,
more secular, at least,
there was your religion, and then there was the rest of your life. And I've definitely seen less of that since I moved to the South at 20 years old. In the past, 7 years, I'm almost 27 years old. Very different point of view with religion. I would say that's part of the reason that I started wanting to vocalize myself in the atheist community, because it's where I grew up, it was very easy to ignore religion.
Right.
It was like this other part of your life that existed on Sundays and holidays, and what probably differs very much from you growing up is I rarely heard the word God around the house.
Okay.
God and your religious beliefs did not play a role in your everyday life.
Oh yeah, down here, at least Pentecostal, my experience, it's a daily thing in your life.
Yeah.
It's like constant.
And that almost makes more sense to me, though. I mean, sure, that you can make the argument that, the more religious you are, the more problems there are. I mean, it's the fundies that, are trying to push their way into government, and that you see in the news every day with this bullshit and that bullshit. But if you do believe it's true, it does make more sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like, the way I grew up, it's almost like everyone, like, kind of has this unspoken, like, we know it's bullshit, but we're gonna pretend anyway, because when we need to be comforted, we have that, but it really doesn't play into your everyday life, and, like, it's like they really have a little box for it.
Right. No, yeah, and it's like, I remember getting into, like, religious discussion with people up in New York, my age, that were, like, Catholic. Like, one of them, what's his name? I don't even know. He kind of turned into a jerk. Like, he's part of the Knights of Columbus now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, what's his name? He was in high school. He was telling me, like, I was his best friend in high school. I'm like, wow, you must not have had any friends. And then I realized how mean that was for me to say to him.
You talking about this person that, like, in the past few months, like, just randomly popped up on Facebook?
Yeah, randomly popped up on Facebook, randomly sent me a friend request. I was like, oh, hey, Josh, because, that's my first name. I go by my middle name. And was wanting to, like, organize the 10-year high school reunion, like, me and him. Because apparently I was probably the only person he got a hold of.
A two-person reunion?
No, like putting it together and sending the invites and all that shit. And I'm like, dude, I'm in Texas. I mean, I might go just to see where all these douchebags ended up, but I wasn't friends with many people in my grade. I was mainly, in my graduating class, most of my friends were like juniors. The seniors kind of sucked. Yeah. Most of them.
I've always been the same way. I gravitate towards who I gravitate. Mm-hmm. I have friends that are, 20 years older than me, 10 years younger.
Exactly. But, and he started realizing just how, because this is, it was more like when I was first really, like, just in everybody's face with, online at least, with atheism, much more so than I am now, because it was newer for me, and he didn't like it. And I was like, and he tried to, like, have a discussion with me, and he got all pissy and ended up blocking me and all this other stuff.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I was like, oh, wow, you're really secure in your belief. But at the same time, he was kind of a jerk back in the day. The only reason I was really friends with him was because my girlfriend at the time was, like, really good friends with his girlfriend, so it was kind of one of those people you had to put up with. And I'm not big on putting up with people. And if I don't like someone, they're going to know it.
Yeah.
And I don't like having to not hide that. So now that I'm not tied to that shit anymore, it was like, I'm not going to hold back when I'm, like, telling you that your God's evil. You believe in it, it's evil. Read the Bible.
Right. That brings up an interesting talking point, though. I mean, I think since we started Better Off Damned and really started vocalizing all of our opinions on this stuff, I would say you've probably had the most ties cut.
Oh, yeah. I've lost professional ties, but I know I can tend to be a little vitriolic.
Sure, but I think it probably plays more into, like, who we all associate with. I mean, you grew up very different from me. You probably have many more religious types in your life.
Used to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, friends on Facebook, if anyone, like, doesn't get, like, all the atheism stuff I do and talk about and advocate and, some of the activism I try to involve myself in, it's more so, like, they just don't get the point,
Yeah.
Because, they're not particularly religious. Some of them believe in God, some of them don't. But, even the ones that do, it's, like, such a non-issue to them, Because, like I said, where I grew up, it's something very easy to ignore. So, like, usually something has to be pretty in your face before you, like, go on some kind of mission to, eradicate it or reason with people.
Yeah.
So I haven't lost too many connections over that. I mean, the worst I really suffered was when I was young, because I came out as an atheist very young. Mm-hmm. And that was probably partially because I wasn't heavily indoctrinated. And also, that's the thing, they put religion in a box, but that box is there.
Yeah.
So at the same time, like, we never talk about God around the house, things like that doesn't play a role in everyday living. They still feel the need to, like, you have to go to CCD, you have to go to Catholicism school so that you could make your communion and
so you can make your box.
Exactly, you're building your box.
Out of ticky-tacky.
It's so important. It doesn't have anything to do with the majority of your life, but it's important. You have to go. Yeah. You have to get confirmed, all this. And, I think I probably believed in God for about as long as you're the ages where you'll believe anything you can't confirm for yourself.
Like Santa and stuff?
I would probably say I started questioning around the same time, but, again, I didn't really need to because it just wasn't such a big part of life. Now, once I was around 8 years old, and I was put into Catholicism school for the first time on weekends, that's when I really started thinking about it, because they were teaching it to us, and, like, I was one of those kids. Something didn't make sense to me. I'm going to say something. I'm not just going to swallow it. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the way I was. And, you know, it was part of the problem, you know, my family had with me as a kid because, you know, I would say I was the same way in a not so good way too. You know, I couldn't accept anything. I questioned everything.
Right.
You know, but I was also in a position to do so.
Oh yeah, but down here in the South, it's like you don't question your parents. It's like if your parents tell you the grass is purple, you say yes. You know, it's that type of raising your children. It's they don't question. The only person that let me really question them was my grandpa. He was very understanding and very like took his time to explain things to me when I would ask why or how does this work and stuff like that. My grandmother was more so, it's like it was like at home privately I could disagree and discuss, but if we were anywhere out in public and I would like be like why or why do we have to do that, it was immediately considered sass and I'd get in trouble.
Right. And you know, here's the thing too, I mean, it's a different culture and people raise their kids differently, they were raised differently. My parents actually tried that approach at a time. And, you know, the thing is, I was their first child. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you have new parents, you know, they're going to go the route that makes sense for them. You know, they don't necessarily know what the right route is. And my parents kind of learned the hard way, like, they couldn't do that with me. Because I was the type of kid that the more you tell me no without justification, the worse I'm going to get about it.
Right.
You know, and it wasn't a matter of, like, letting me get away with things they didn't want me to, or being forced to raise me differently than they'd planned. It's just, you know, they were, you know, getting used to raising a kid,
right.
I think. And, you know, also, it didn't work.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be a nightmare otherwise, you know, because for one thing, you could say, no, you do what I say, you know, that's not going to keep me from questioning things to myself, even if I'm not allowed to vocalize it. You know, and it's just, I was the type of kid, because I said so, did not work with me.
Right.
It wasn't effective.
Yeah.
You know, I needed justification for things. It's like, and part of the reason they went with it is because they realized when they did give me justification, it actually worked.
Right.
You know, if they could make me understand why they're telling me no to something, I wouldn't keep rebelling if I understood it. You know, it would actually be effective. It's like, okay, I get why you're telling me not to do that now. That makes sense to me, and that's how you got me to stop.
Right.
You know? But, you know, definitely they had a lot of problems with me in the schools, especially religion school, because I would contradict the teacher to her face. The religion teacher, didn't matter. You know, but that's what solidified my atheism. And, you know, I actually, unlike a lot of atheists, because a lot of people don't start using the word until they kind of get involved in it or reading the literature and stuff. It's just like, you know, they're de facto atheists. They don't believe in God, right? I actually have been using the word since I was a little kid. And I only knew it because, you know, my family liked to watch All in the Family. You know? Mike Stivic, you know, Archie Bunker was always like, you damn atheist, and, you know, that's how I learned the word. Like, oh, atheist, that's what you call people that don't believe in God. It was just a label. You know, I wasn't aware at the time, you know, what kind of stigma there is around that, and, you know, so I never really went through what a lot of atheists go through, where they try to avoid the word because of some of the baggage that religious people put onto it. It was just the word I knew.
Yeah.
It was a definition.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh, okay, if you don't believe in God, you're called an atheist. Okay, I'm an atheist. You know, and when I was a kid, I had to explain what that was to a lot of kids because it wasn't familiar to them. It's like, oh, that means I don't believe in God. So I didn't get the whole you're an atheist. No, I got the you don't believe in God. You know, Thomas, you grew up down here too in the South, right?
Yes.
So how does your background differ from David's?
Well, yeah, I definitely grew up in a pretty religious part of the world. I don't think my indoctrination was nearly as heavy as David's. I'd say I'm in between Jack's upbringing and David's upbringing, leaning slightly closer to Jack's upbringing. There was definitely a God box. It didn't come up every day, but we would go to church every Sunday, kind of on and off. There were months when we would go a lot, and then it would kind of die down. My mom worked a lot on Sundays, which had a lot to do with it.
Was your family any particular denomination?
Yes, we were Methodists. Methodism is a relatively loose, liberal sect of Christianity. It's specifically a rejection of Calvinism. Calvinism is the idea that God has essentially created the non-believers to go to hell. It's the belief in predestination, basically.
Okay.
It's this, anybody can get into heaven if you have a spark in your heart, kind of
But if
happy-go-lucky, hippie. You didn't have to wear nice clothes into church or anything. My parents would make me wear nice clothes into church. And, it was kind of fun. It was very, community church. And so it was kind of the sense of belonging was the big thing that kept me, I guess, believing, so to speak, is everybody's just so nice. It's this community,
So what worked you out of it?
Just thinking. I don't know if I'm a little confused about my own belief, because I was always pretty skeptical about it, and I think that I really did just say that I believed. And so I don't think I was ever really quite in. I think I had 1 foot in the box and 1 foot out most of the time.
So you kind of went with it enough that you're not sure how much you believed
Yeah.
back when you considered yourself a believer.
Yeah. And my mom didn't bring it up a lot. She was oddly unreligious compared to her parents. My grandparents were pretty, they were evangelicals. They went on missionary trips all around the world.
Were they also Methodist?
I guess they were Methodist. He went to the Methodist. My grandpa went to the Methodist church with us. He was kind of like a guest speaker a few times, even. He was very, very respected in the church. He was one of the guys,
Okay.
But my mom, I guess, realized how personal it is and how you can't force it, She sent me to church camp a couple of summers. It was a pretty, we didn't really talk about the church thing a whole lot. It was mostly running around outside, playing games and stuff, but it was an hour in the morning right after breakfast and an hour at night right after dinner where they would tell us these stories. And I guess, going to church and learning a little bit about it was probably what really pulled me away, because as much as my parents had taught me is there is a God, Jesus was his son, he died for our sins, he lives in your heart, and they told me this at a very young age, and I thought there was literally a little man living inside of my chest.
The skeleton.
Yeah.
Kids can take things kind of literally.
Yeah, I took a lot of things really literally.
Which is part of why I advocate that, adults that believe certain things, they're childish.
Yeah.
The literalists.
And something that's a good example of how I'm not sure how much I really bought into it ever is I was about 5 years old, and I got into a first cause argument with my mom. And when she said, "Oh no, God wasn't created by anything, he always existed," I said, "What? That doesn't make sense." And that was about the end of the conversation, really. If I could argue with her about it today, I would have gotten into the whole how that's really a contradiction instead of just knowing it was a contradiction kind of subconsciously.
Yeah. That's interesting because me and you have had that conversation. It's a bit of a phenomenon. It's, when you started looking into the arguments for and against God.
It's like you made them up yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It's like all these counter apologetics and, the rules of logic and stuff like this. I've made that argument half my life, and I just never put it quite like that.
Yeah, now I have a name for it.
Yeah. But, that's part of, I think, that says something, how easily those conclusions are drawn. Because when I first started getting interested in, the atheism-theism debate side of the issue, finding that so many of the arguments weren't that much more sophisticated than the arguments I've already made.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just, put in a more sophisticated way than I might have argued them when I was younger.
Yes, just kind of an airtight if blank, then blank, just straight logic circuitry, and then you really, really start to understand it. But I had grasped at the straws.
But that implies something
life.
about truth to me. I mean, you know how, I saw an image a few days ago, and it was talking about, I forget who it was quoting, but it was talking about how if we had to start the world over, say we went extinct and humans came back up again, things like that, that all the rules of science, everything we've figured out, all the technology, chemistry, everything like that, we'd figure it out all again.
Yes.
But if religion resurfaced, the stories would be entirely different.
Yeah.
It's very much like that. That the conclusions I drew before knowing the arguments they're the natural conclusions you come to because they mirror the professional counter-apologetics.
Yeah.
From people who debate against religion professionally. So something about conclusions that are so easily drawn and multiple people end up drawing from different backgrounds without ever hearing the information, that says something about truth to me.
Yes, it does. I agree with you completely.
Whereas religious stories, you have to be taught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then, growing up elementary school, I was a pretty normal kid. I have a weird voice, and so I was made fun of a lot, and I had really big ears. So I played a lot of video games. I was kind of the nerdy kid, but I had a handful of friends. I
like how he says had.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the past, But I liked Pokemon a whole lot, and I remember, back when that was first coming out, that was a big religious controversy. And I remember I was riding home with my grandpa one day, and I asked him, What's the deal with Pokemon? I've played it, and there's nothing about religion in it. I don't understand. He went on about how there's witches in it, and all this witchcraft, and all these evil spells and stuff, and I was like, no, Grandpa, that's not true. That's not in there. I'll turn the game on when we get home. I'll show you what Pokemon it's really fun. I thought it was really fun, and I just wanted to show people, I want to show you my Pokemans.
Did you grow up with any of that? Because that, in my background, it's a concept I find very difficult to wrap my head around. Because I noticed the fundamental denominations, they really want to push, like, even the most fictional things that, call itself fiction.
Yeah.
If it has to do with demons or monsters or any of that stuff, like, they think there's something inherently, like, actually evil about it, even if it calls itself fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I was growing up, in the 90s, one of the big things was, Pokemon and then Harry Potter. The Harry Potter movies, there was such a big deal about it. I'm like, well, this is weird. It's a movie. I mean, I didn't have TV when I was really, really young, but once, it was probably... My grandpa had a TV, like, in his room that he watched the news and football on, because he didn't go to church. My grandmother did.
Uh-huh.
My grandmother, she ended up getting into soap operas, and then she got rid of the TVs because of that, because she became, like, addicted to soap operas. And she's like, oh, the TV does have evil spirits. Why else would you get addicted to it? So at least that's what I'm assuming her reasoning was.
Yeah.
But now she has a TV and all she watches is Fox News.
Huh.
Which I'm like, yeah, come on. But anyway, with the Pokemon thing,
sound like my grandmother.
it was very along the lines to me of like the whole virtual pet fad.
Yeah.
And I had one of those, like the Tamagotchis
those
and
were
stuff.
so
yeah.
awesome.
I had a few of those, and when the Pokemon cartoon was coming on TV, I'd watch it. And I'm like, it's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother wouldn't get me the game or anything, but I had a Game Boy. I had like Tetris, Mario, Ninja Turtles, a whole bunch of different Game Boy games.
Uh-huh.
And I would go and stay periods of time with my mom. And whenever I was with my mom didn't go to church, nothing like that. Her husband at the time was Baptist, but he didn't go to church either.
Mm-hmm.
And I would get to go watch movies at the theater and stuff like that when I was with my mom. But when I was with my grandma, I wasn't able to do any of that. And, like, Harry Potter was one I was like, I want to just go see it for myself. Because I'm like, if it's evil and there's evil spirits, God will protect me because I have so much faith anyway.
Okay.
I want to see what it's all about. And it wasn't a big deal. I didn't think it was a very good movie at the time. It wasn't up my alley as a kid. It was a movie. It was neat. And then Pokemon, whenever, the only thing in there that any of the religious people had a beef with that I heard about, I never heard of anyone saying there was witches or anything. It was just the evolution thing.
Oh.
Yeah, even though it's like nothing like real evolution.
That's because that's so commonly referred to. That's what I think a lot of people think evolution really is
right.
Morphing is what they imagine it as.
Right.
The real thing, though, with Pokemon that bothered me, and I tied this to the idea of what people do with religion, is they wouldn't even... I offered to show them, and they would not even look at the screen at the game.
Yeah.
And it just it reminded me of, like, they heard something, and they don't want to even think about whether it's
they
true or
want
not.
to keep their
Yeah, it's like, if I can show you that what you were told isn't true, shouldn't you be happy about that? And no, it was like the opposite. No, I don't want to know the truth. I don't want to see the game, even if it doesn't have any of that stuff in it.
I don't
because
know
it
how
might
that
and it'd be
works.
tempting.
Yeah,
or
I mean,
whatever.
you wrote a letter to your family. You wrote a blog about that. You guys could go check that out on our website, betteroffdamn.com. You wrote a letter to your family, sent it to all your family members, and your grandmother wouldn't read it.
Yeah, she refuses to read it.
Now, in her mind, do you think, and I know it may be different for her than people typically that do things like that, does not reading it mean it's not true to her?
Probably. It doesn't
Like
really
it works
exist.
like that?
Sure.
It doesn't really exist?
Well, I mean, my grandmother dropped out of school in the 8th grade and got married. And started having babies.
Okay.
So, I mean, she's, I guess, education-wise, she's really only on par with, what is 8th grade? 14? Yeah, 14.
Yeah.
It's 14. So, with a 14-year-old. So, I mean, as a Southern 14-year-old from, she was born in 38. My father was born in 34, so 40s, 50s,
Okay.
40s. She
Alright.
got, or, yeah,
Yeah.
late 40s. She got married, started having babies.
Right.
And she had 6 children. One was had sudden infant death syndrome. And she raised my older brother until he was like 13, and then raised me. So I was like the 7th child she raised.
Okay.
And like, I think honestly, she was probably the most indoctrinating of me. Like, her kids are like, they went from Pentecostal, which is like hardcore literalist, you know, women can't wear pants, makeup, jewelry, any of that stuff. No TV, all that good stuff. But her kids are now like, they don't even go to church. They're Baptist. When I say those kids, it's like my uncles.
Okay.
They don't. But my Aunt Joy, straight fundamentalist, Pentecostal. In fact, Jerry DeWitt's wife was a member of my aunt's church, Brother Cooper's church. I used to go there all the time. I actually got to see Jerry DeWitt preach in Pitkin when I was younger. Well, when I
Right.
say younger, I wasn't that much younger. I was like early, mid-teens.
Yeah,
And
we've
he's
had
a pretty
some
good speaker.
interesting conversations about that. About, you know, you recognized him, like when Jerry DeWitt came
Yeah.
out as an atheist last year.
I'm like, I
you
know
you
that
kept saying,
guy.
I know that guy from somewhere.
I've like sat and talked to him, and like the DeWitt family is around Pitkin too, and DeRitter and that area, and that's where my aunt lives. So I mean, I know. I mean, I when I say I know, I mean I've shook hands, I've had conversations with Jerry DeWitt, and he's pretty cool. His wife knows my aunt and my uncle.
Okay.
And stuff like that, because she was one of those church members that knows everybody in the church.
Right. And you recently confirmed with him over Facebook that you guys have
Yeah, I was talking to
you've
him.
been to his sermons
because
and
I sent him the
your
fake-
families knew each other to a certain extent.
Well, the Lewises, which
Right.
would be my aunt's, my Aunt Joy's husband's, my Uncle John, his family, and you know, everyone in the church, they're all good people. There wasn't much bigotry in many of the churches I went to that was very overt. You would only really hear it during revivals, which would be like the 6-7 night stretches of church services every night.
Right.
I'm sure you've heard of them. You've grown up down here. You've heard of revivals, like a week-long revival, all that
No,
good
I
stuff.
actually am not familiar with that at all.
Oh, well,
Do go on.
yeah, it's like week-long like sermons where they happen like around 6 o'clock at night, and they go on to like 10 to 1.
a lot of them are tent revivals.
Yeah, a lot of them are tents. Most of the ones I went to were just in churches, and it would be like 7 to 10 different Pentecostal churches got together for this week, and you would hear a lot of the anti-gay stuff at those. You would hear a lot of the hellfire and brimstone at those. Not many of the pastors and preachers that I experienced personally on a weekly basis were hellfire and brimstone. As I started getting older, my grandmother's church turned into Hellfire and Brimstone Church, and that was the Pine Forest Pentecostal Church, and Brother Jordan was the pastor. Really nice guy until the Hellfire and Brimstone stuff. And like, the problem with the world is homosexuality. The problem with the world is sexual deviancy. The problem with the world is all this shit, you know?
So on a week-to-week basis, was it just like, those are just matter-of-fact
At
things?
first, yeah, it was never like, it wasn't the main point of the sermons when I was younger, But I also...
They believed it, but
Yeah,
it was just
yeah.
like, well, yeah, we know what things are bad.
Yeah, I mean,
We
I've
don't
seen
need to discuss it
services
every
where the
week.
pastor would be like, stops like, I can just sense a gay spirit in one of the children here. You know, it's okay. Nobody's going to judge you. Come up here. We'll go ahead and pray for you. And then like 3 or 4 kids would come up there, and it's like, wow, you just outed those gay kids.
That's pretty fucked up.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, it is fucked up because those kids not only have to deal with it from the rest of the church now is going to look at them differently. Word's going to spread outside the church pretty quickly, especially in the smaller towns. And Vidor was a smaller town then. It's like 11,000 population now. When I was growing up, it was like 7 to 10 at most. You know, and Pitkin's a population even to this day of like 200, 250.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned Pitkin, and I think we talked about this once before, but one of my counselors at the church camp that I went to was from Pitkin.
You didn't find out what church? Or you wouldn't remember
but
anyway?
I told you about him, and you remember him, Big John.
Oh, yeah, Johnny. I know Johnny.
Big John.
He came out as gay for a while.
Really?
Yeah, he was a bigger dude.
He was huge.
And he had like the slicked hair. It was black.
No, he had...
He may not have had it slicked then, but he had like darker hair.
I don't really remember what hair color he had. He wore glasses.
Yeah.
He had basically he had kind of just short, a little bit wavy hair.
Yeah.
That's all I really remember.
But yeah.
He was a cool guy.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy. He is. I remember being friends with him on MySpace for a while when he was going through his little coming out phase.
Is
Now
he
he's
back
straight
to
again.
straight
yeah,
again?
he's
Oh.
back to straight again. Though I think with his case, it might have just been more him rebelling against everything than
Really?
it was actually being gay. Because that happens. That happens a lot.
I'm not very familiar with that.
You know?
I've never really heard of...
I've met a few.
I mean,
different people.
I've read stories about such things, but like, you know, like we've been talking about, I grew up in a very different part of the country, you know.
Yeah.
You know, most gay kids felt very comfortable to come out, and, you know, I can't imagine someone pretending to be of a different sexual orientation just to rebel against their parents. But I guess if you come from somewhere where that's something your parents, like, have very strong opinions against, I guess that does make sense that
Yeah.
some kids might do that.
Sure. And, you know, it's just... I don't know. I just think that down here, and when you get into the more fundamentalist religions, Baptist, Pentecostal, that's when you start seeing more, like, messed up psychology with people, honestly, because they're so indoctrinated. And it's like, you know, that you wouldn't hear anti-gay and you know, whatever all the time, but in Pentecostal churches, you always hear hellfire and brimstone. The fear of hell is a driving factor in most all the sermons.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like 3 nights a week, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday.
I mean, I could tell
Sunday
that
morning,
just
Sunday night.
driving around the area we live in. I mean,
Yeah.
they put it on the billboards right out front. Mm-hmm. You know,
And,
they
you know,
advertise that.
And it's like, you know, I would have Wednesday night service, which was like, I guess it's the Bible study service. Then you'd have Sunday morning, Sunday school. You'd have the kids' Sunday school and then the adult Sunday school, which was another like little Bible study. Friday night, you'd have youth group. And Sunday night, you'd have main like revival service. Wednesday night, you'd also have another youth group if you were young enough to go to youth group instead of the main church.
You see, that's so strange to me, like how more people don't recognize that as indoctrination.
Right.
Because how many things that are like just the truth of the world we live in, do you have to push that much and focus so much time to make people see, you know?
No, yeah, I get it. And
You know, one thing I did want to ask while we're sort of on the topic, you mentioned earlier that you could sometimes be the most vitriolic of the three of us. Do you think that has to do with the fact that you were the most indoctrinated?
oh yeah,
I mean,
oh,
because
yeah.
I figured it out young because of my situation. Thomas isn't sure how much he believed because his family was more loosely religious. I mean, do you think there's that part of you that, like, the vitriol comes from a place of, like, I was lied to my whole life and the
Yes.
fact that you really bought into
Yes. And also sometimes because I'll like go to bed and be like, oh crap, I forgot to pray. Wait, what am I thinking?
Huh.
Because I'm like half asleep.
Still?
Yeah.
it? Wow.
Yeah.
Just
Just like it's
habitual?
like, whoa, yeah, it's so habitual. So habitual. It's like I catch myself every once. I'm like, what the fuck?
Because that just becomes
It's
routine.
programming.
Yeah.
It's literally programming and, you know, deprogramming, brainwashing Takes a long time, and that's what it is. It's brainwashing. Period. It is a form of mind control, regardless of what anyone wants to say. Under a technical definition of mind control, brainwashing is one of them, and religious indoctrination is brainwashing.
Do you think that's part of what? Because I noticed, like you said, you've done magic since you were a little kid, but it was around the time that you started coming away from it that you got interested in the mentalism aspect. Do you think that has to do with that? Like maybe like even if it's just for a few minutes at a time, like being able to manipulate the way someone thinks?
Maybe. I mean, because one of the biggest secrets in magic is practice and effect so much that you don't have to think about doing the mechanics of it,
right,
and trick yourself into believing you're really doing it. That's how you're going to put on your best performance, at least in the moment of doing the illusion.
That makes sense.
Especially close-up illusions. If you're palming a coin, you forget the coin's there, and you forget it's there on purpose. And you want to get everything just to be muscle memory, and you want to trick yourself into believing it. And, so I guess I'm just used to being able to do that to myself. And, plus having that combined with the brainwashing, a lot of, I guess that is like tied together. Because, I was so fundamentally religious, I would do magic tricks and to teach little Bible stories and stuff. So, I put the two kind of together. And I was the only child my grandfather let have playing cards because I wouldn't gamble with them, even though he had a gambling addiction.
Interesting.
He didn't have a gambling problem, his words.
Okay.
But he let me have them because I was like, look what I can do with them. And he's like, oh, that's neat.
Okay.
But the first time I did it, it's like I had to show him how it was done, so he didn't think I was messing with witchcraft or nothing.
So, say you did all your magic and that never alluded that there was tricks to it, or at least never revealed what some of the tricks were. Your family, like some people in it, would have literally thought that you were messing with demonic forces and stuff?
I think some of the older members of the family, sure, because they had never seen a magician before. Except maybe on TV, and if they had a TV. Because it was like my grandfather's siblings were Baptist. They're still Baptist, I guess, some of them. My Uncle Terry doesn't go to church. Yeah, he doesn't really care. He believes in a God.
Okay.
He thinks I'm too smart to be an atheist. That's his own words to me when I said I'm an atheist. No, you're too smart to be an atheist. I'm like, what? That doesn't make sense.
That seems so backwards to me, but...
Right. But, he doesn't, go to church or practice doctrine or anything.
Well, I think some people with looser beliefs, that might be what traps them. Is because they don't think about what they believe as often. Yeah. There's something to be said about people that are very indoctrinated and, very hard to change their beliefs. But, people that don't have to think about them at all and could just put them away when they're not using them, it could be hard to bring some of those people away from it, too, because, they haven't considered what's wrong with it, what's right with it, anything like that. It's just this other thing,
Did you know anybody that was, Pentecostal or hardcore Southern Baptist when you were growing up?
No, not really. I never really asked any of the kids at my school what religion they were or anything. Santa Fe is... I went to school in Santa Fe my whole life. Santa Fe is kind of famous as, the school prayer fiasco school. And it was forced to secularize a little bit after that. And this was before I went, and so I kind of... was going through it as it was transitioning. And, I sensed that most of the kids were really dumb. But I never really connected it to the fact that they're probably being raised by equally dumb people.
I really think it has to do more with indoctrination than intelligence because, I don't like to, try to give myself so much credit because, I came away from these kind of beliefs so young. I don't think I'm smarter than anyone. I was just in a situation where I was able to openly question things in a way a lot of other people aren't.
Yeah,
and, I was a curious kid. If anything, I attribute how young I was when I started dismissing beliefs to curiosity more than anything. Because there are other people who were raised as loosely religious as me, and they believe in God hardcore today, as adults. you know, people I went to school with as a kid and stuff like that. But, you know, the thing is, I've always been very curious about everything. I want to know how everything worked.
Right.
You know, I've never been able to just accept that this is the way things are without wanting to understand it.
Right.
You know, so I would attribute my curiosity to my atheism more than anything.
Right. Actually, the last time I went down to my grandmother's, I ended up staying the night because I was going to go fishing the next day. Mm-hmm. And that next morning, I woke up, and when I wake up in the morning, I mean, you know, I'm not a pleasant person in the mornings. I don't like anybody. Like
you are when I don't talk to you.
Sure. When people don't talk to me, I'm great.
Like I don't think I've said this before, but usually, me and David are roommates, by the way. So help give a little context here. But yeah, in the morning, if you're up ahead of me and I can tell you haven't been up long, I wait for you to talk to me. I actually do consciously do that. It's like I'll let him like conversate with me first, and
when I wake up, it's like there's like a good 30 minutes of an hour that I hate everybody. Huh. I hate everybody except my dog. It's like I hate the cat. I hate everybody. But I was over there and I was making a cup of coffee, and I can't remember what started it. My grandmother started talking about God and all this other good stuff. I don't remember exactly what happened in the conversation, but it ended with me walking out to go get a cigarette. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know, well, think about this for a second. What was his name? Elijah, you know, that prophet, right? And he was bald, and he was going up that hill. And there was like 42 kids started making fun of him, calling him bald head, and telling him to go up the hill and stuff. And so he turned around and he cursed the children in the name of the Lord. And all of a sudden, these 2 she-bears came out that God sent, and they killed the children. I think it was actually something about abortion. I'm like, I don't think a God that could do that is anti-abortion.
Okay.
And she was not happy.
Well, she wasn't happy because you took her own book and used it against her.
Oh, yeah.
They don't know what's in it.
The thing is she does know what's in it. She's read it several times.
So it's just, that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
So she's at that point where God is essentially a dictator and he knows best no matter what he's doing.
Pretty much.
Well, that's most fundamental denominations. Mm-hmm. I mean, they could take the most horrendous things and, like, if God condones it, it's therefore good. At least if God's doing it, it's good.
Yeah. I just don't get how...
They do make a distinction between, you know, people doing certain things and God doing it.
Yeah.
Certain actions.
That just says, well...
anything God does himself, they just say, well, we don't understand his reasoning because he's God and we're people. But, you know, if he did it, it was righteous, and they don't let themselves think about it.
Yeah, and another thing with the Pentecostal denomination is who gets into heaven's a lot more exclusive in Pentecostalism than a lot of other fundamentalist faiths, because they believe that in the Bible it says that receiving the Holy Spirit as evidence of such as receiving it, you'll speak in tongues. So whenever you see someone speaking in tongues, that's the Holy Spirit coming into them and causing them to do that. That's
so
their
they're
evidence.
The whole, the gates are wide, but the path is narrow.
Right, and you have to speak in tongues as evidence of receiving the Holy Spirit. You don't have to do it in front of anybody, but you have to do it. And that's like, okay, you've received the Holy Spirit. As long as you don't sin and whatnot, you won't lose it. And then if you do sin, it's not that you lose it, it's just you have to pray back through to the speaking of tongues again as the evidence to yourself that you're okay. And if you don't do that, you're not saved.
Right. It's just also convoluted. Like, you know, to this day, I mean, I've studied a lot of the theology, you know, I'm not ignorant to what religious people believe, but, like, I would say that, and maybe it's because I wasn't, like you, religious previously. Maybe it's because of how long I've been an atheist and the fact that I never bought into it that way, but, like, most of it, even what I understand, I don't get it. Do you get what I'm saying? I don't get it. You know, I don't see how so much of this just makes perfect sense to people. I mean, I imagine that if I were a religious person, or if I grew up religious, that I would have to be one of those people that, you know, just accept, well, that's what it is, and admit I don't understand it. But a lot of religious people like to, you know, act like it makes perfect sense.
Right.
And I don't think it makes sense to as many people as they claim it does. Because really, why would it be so convoluted? Why all the, God's hidden, he has to come to you through revelation, why is it so, inobvious, and why is belief without evidence so important? Why the whole faith thing? I don't understand how, that
makes
sense to people.
I mean, I understand why it's there. I mean, it's just a way to control people.
Well, obviously.
But why it makes sense,
how do you get someone to believe in an invisible, non-existent God? You have to come up with something like this concept of faith, give people a reason to believe without seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Of course, that makes perfect sense. What doesn't make sense to me is, how that makes sense to people that believe it.
Right.
If you seriously consider it still, it really doesn't make sense, though, because the whole argument that if God did show himself, that would take away our choice of being good. It would just be compulsory that you have to be good and obey his will. Mm-hmm. Yet we have evidence right there in the Bible. Lucifer has absolute knowledge of God's existence, and yet he goes against God's will constantly.
Right.
Yeah, and
angels aren't supposed to have free will, and he started as an angel.
Yeah.
That's the difference. That's why angels are jealous of man, is because God, according to the Bible, gave man free will, but he did not give angels free will. If he didn't give angels free will, how the hell did Lucifer defy God?
Right.
Right, it's always been just a combination of a billion tiny little things that led to my disbelief.
But yeah, that's the whole thing. A lot of it's trivial, but when you add it all up, it really... I've never understood how so many people just believe in it. I guess that's the power of indoctrination.
Yep, that's all it is. Indoctrination and the Pascal's wager. They're afraid, and they don't know about all the other religions, and they're afraid that if they don't believe in God, they're going to burn for eternity.
Right, I think the concept
it's
behind
the fear.
Pascal's wager is what keeps most of the moderates and, more loosely liberal or loose believers believing in the stuff.
Right, which doesn't even make sense, because if you believe it and you don't go by the rules in the Bible, according to the mythology, you're going to hell.
But most of the moderates don't know the Bible.
Right.
And also, I don't think it's the end of it's not the damnation side of the concept of Pascal's wager that I think gets moderates. I think it's just the whole fear of death end of it. They want to think there's something more.
That's a very common factor, almost in every single.
You believe that there's just nothing after you die?
Yeah,
it's
terrifying to people.
What do you believe happens after you die?
I've done, because ever since I heard Jack say it, I've always said, it's okay, what year were you born? Well, yeah. Imagine 2 years before that.
Yeah.
What was that like? That's exactly how dead's going to be.
That's the only real analogy I've ever had to really get some people to grasp the concept of what I think happens after you die.
Were you unhappy before you were born?
Because it's amazing that, people who are raised, whether loosely or heavily indoctrinated, believe that something continues after death. A lot of them can't even grasp the concept of not existing.
Right.
Even very deistic people that think your consciousness floats around or something, they just cannot grasp the concept of just nothingness.
I'm sure television doesn't help. Especially since all these ghost programs and all that kind of stuff is so popular.
Yeah.
Alright, so let's talk about Better Off Damned. Now, personally, I think that all atheists that are involved in the religious debate are anti-theists to a certain extent.
Right.
Otherwise, it would be irrelevant to you who believes what.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of them won't consider them anti-theists. They won't consider themselves that. But if you're even interested in trying to convince someone to the contrary, part of you believes that there's something wrong with these beliefs.
Right.
I think, some people that don't use the term think that anti-theist is just a word for people that want to eradicate religion. Mm-hmm. And that's true for a lot of anti-theists. They think the world would be better without it. They're not going to take people's faith away. You can't do that anyway. But, they think we'd be better off if we get to a point where, it just goes away, fades into the past. Mm-hmm. And, other atheists are happy for people to have their beliefs. But if you're trying to convince anyone that their beliefs are wrong, you might not be the most hardcore anti-theist, but you're definitely an anti-theist.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. So what I'm curious is why each of you, Thomas, why does it matter to you to speak out against religion?
Just the sheer amount of it that spills into our government. I wouldn't consider myself purely an anti-theist, as I'm an anti-theist in the political spectrum, and so I guess I would call myself a secularist.
So if everyone kept their beliefs to themselves, that would be fine by you?
Yeah, you know, I mean, if ever you can wear your little Jesus necklace that's made out of nails, and...
Now, I personally do believe that we'd be better off if religion became a thing of the past.
Oh, I definitely think
I don't know
that,
how
but
much
I'm
I
not...
feel the need to push it.
Yeah.
You know...
It has to happen on its own.
Yeah, and it is fading, you know. Secularism and atheism, it's growing. But, you know, the thing is, I think there's a lot of things inherently dangerous with the beliefs themselves.
Yeah.
I don't think there would be a lack of problems in the world from religion if people just kept their beliefs to themselves.
Yeah.
Because I think it can harm yourself. I mean, it would be better if more people took the initiative to want as many of their beliefs to be true as possible and have as few false beliefs as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I think that even if everybody just... Since I grew up Methodist and I saw how it worked, even if everybody was just... All the Christians in the world were Methodists or something like that, that most of the problems with religion would go away. Because Methodist churches believe in... they'll marry gay couples in the states that it's legal.
Sure.
And stuff like that. You know, I never really encountered any hate in the Methodist Church.
Sure. You know, some people disagree with me on this, but I think that global atheism, or to where the vast majority of people don't believe in God, I think that's an inevitable consequence
Yes.
of getting to the point where religion is entirely private. To
Yeah.
where you're not forcing your beliefs on other people, to where it's not this public thing, to where you don't have all the indoctrination. I think if we're accomplishing that goal, which I think, you know, the secular community is.
It's a slowly but surely kind of thing. It's
Right.
generation by generation.
I think inevitably most people won't believe in God as a consequence of that.
As long as Romney doesn't get elected.
Yeah.
Because religion strives on indoctrination
Yeah.
and strives on people pushing their religious agendas.
Yeah, and you're already seeing it, like the baby boomer generation, or let's say the generation after that a little bit more, does not indoctrinate their children quite as heavily. And so you're seeing, like, what is it, like 30% of the population under 30 considers themselves spiritual but not religious, or atheists, basically, on the very liberal end of it, you know? And think about what their kids are going to be like, because they're not going to push their kids even as hard as they were pushed.
Right.
I think in the next, 50 years, we're going to see it really snowball into, or anti-snowball, I guess, you know?
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah, the number's gonna flip flop.
Yeah.
There's where 15% are gonna believe that there's like a God or whatever, and the rest are gonna be just whatever, spiritual or not.
And I think
Preferably not spiritual, but not religious, because that's having your cake and eating it,
Well,
too.
I mean, a lot of religion stuff is really falling to the wayside. There's so many people that are like, I love Jesus, but I hate religion. And they think
Right.
organized religion is just the most horrific thing on the planet, which it's pretty close.
Yeah, but you know, like I said, I think that's also like part of what's gonna play into that inevitability, because you know what, organized religion is what keeps religion striving.
Yeah.
You know, organized religion goes away, people move away from it, less people are going to hold on to the beliefs, especially as the generations keep changing, you know, and people grow up with less religion in their lives.
Yeah.
You
People
know,
just aren't going to be able to lasso the young ones back in when they're not even really in to begin with, you know?
right. I mean, like where I grew up, where everyone's pretty much secular, whether you have a religion or not, and you don't let it dictate your whole life, you know, that's not as inherently dangerous. You know, I mean, I'm sure there's still plenty of bullshit that comes of people having these beliefs, you know,
Right.
and it doesn't help them, it doesn't help others, you know, it still allows people to justify stupid shit. But the less it plays into your life,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, really, and I think that's most of the country, it's just, the heavily religious are the most vocal.
Yeah.
But, most people, religion isn't like a daily thing. They don't consider the whole, what would Jesus do? Or, what does God want in every situation that occurs in their life?
Yeah.
What's your main motivation for, putting your voice into this?
Because it raises doubts in people that hear it, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I really don't think it's... Let me see. I don't think people in general, and there are individuals and exceptions, but I don't think people in general are able to separate their beliefs from themselves at all. I really don't think they are. I think most people that have these kind of beliefs, they are, that does go into your decision making. That goes into what policies you enact in office. It goes into all of that. And I don't think if I was just silent and whatnot, I'd be able to change minds, obviously. At least by putting my voice out there, someone might hear it, and maybe I say something that puts that spark of doubt in their mind to be able to separate, that belief from, the fiction from reality. Let them start questioning, and maybe that'll drive them to actually go and seek answers, and maybe they'll come to the same conclusions that, we all have.
Right. I mean, and, people who say that, they don't think there's something inherently bad with religion, so long as it's not organized religion or it's not being pushed into policy or on others.
I mean, cults.
No, it still dictates your view of the world. It colors your worldview. It has so much to do with what your perception of reality is, and it affects how you treat others.
Yep.
I mean, here's the thing. I open the newspaper, online, right? I read the news every day. There's not a single day that something terrible hasn't happened that's directly connected to what the person's religious beliefs were.
Yep.
And even if their religious beliefs didn't cause them to do something, they then use that to justify it.
Mm-hmm. Only God can judge me.
Yeah, that woman just like last week
Superglued
her daughter's hand to the wall and just beat her up. She
Yeah.
was like 2 years old.
Because she was being disrespectful and defiant.
There's something wrong with the person beyond
and
just religion.
These people, when we shared it, these people saying, well, I don't see what this has to do with religion. The day the woman did that, before the event occurred, she said, why does God put these obstacles in my path? Then she super glued her child's hands to the wall and beat the crap out of her kid. Put her kid in a coma for, 3 days? 2 days?
2 days.
And then at the court hearing, she says, only God can judge me? Fuck you if you don't think it's about religion.
Right, and see, that's my biggest problem, is, the justification alone is reason enough to see these beliefs as harmful. Mm-hmm. Because, yes, I do think, people would still do this kind of shit if we didn't have religion. But they wouldn't have the justification.
Exactly.
They wouldn't have the excuses. They wouldn't have people willing to defend their actions.
And the fact that they wouldn't have that excuse would deter at least some people.
Right, because some people go through with things because their religious beliefs tells them it's okay on some level. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, it's an old adage, but, good people will do good, bad people will do bad. But you know what? Religion fades away. You won't have good people doing as much bad shit.
Right.
Right.
It takes and that's the point for me.
To do a bad thing.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap this up. We're just past an hour. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know it's been mostly about us, our personal backgrounds. We're going to go more topic-related after this, I think, with the podcast. But at least it gave you a chance to get to know each of us individually, our histories, and now you can attach that to us when you listen to us further after this. So visit us at betteroffdamned.com and look up Better Off Damned on Facebook, and we're also on YouTube.
Yeah, like, subscribe, and share.
Definitely. All right, thank you for listening, guys. These are only going to get better. We're still getting used to it. Have a good day.
Yes, have a nice day.